Hear now our scripture for this morning from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9, verses 9 through 13 and 18 to 26. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have come to call not the righteous, but the sinners." While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader of the synagogue came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And instantly the woman was made well. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread throughout that district. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
One of the reasons we put the video together is that sometimes people have the impression that to be in church is to have your life together. And I think if each of us are honest, we know that that's certainly not the case for ourselves. Each of us have places of brokenness in our lives that we struggle with, places that even when it feels like we've got our life together, as we begin searching it out, we realize that there are sometimes holes, there are gaps, there are places where we're always in need of care. And I think that comes through in that video. There are several places where I think particularly it ties in with our message for today. And this is this powerful story of Jesus and the healing of two very different people in their lives. Thinking about this also got me thinking about maybe the best news I took out of annual conference this year was that we were able to reduce our health insurance premiums for retirees by a significant amount. And in fact, it's going to free up about $1 million in our annual budget and the annual conference to help start new churches and to start initiatives in congregations like ours where we could apply for a grant. Maybe there's some special project we would like to do to reach out to folks in the community, and we feel like we need some help to do that. There are grants that are going to become available for local congregations to apply for, to reach out to new people and in new places, and to find new ways to help connect people to God's grace. That about $1 million a year was found through an incredible savings brought about by the Health Care Act, the Affordable Health Care Act, that brings about insurance savings for us across the board. And the cool thing is it's going to help us to be able to reach new people for Christ. And I'm just really excited about that. We're all in need of knowing our place and care in life, that God's care comes to us in our brokenness. And it's God's healing for the broken that we experience within our own selves. Jesus is at a dinner. He's at a dinner with Matthew. Remember, Matthew is one of the disciples that's been called. He is the disciple who is a tax collector. And while he's having dinner with him, the Pharisees, others start looking on and saying, why is it that Jesus has dinner with tax collectors and sinners and people who don't fit the idea of what we think good people are, of church folks that we often would kind of think of? Why is it Jesus is eating with them? And Jesus overhears, and he has this amazing phrase. He says, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick do. That Jesus has come to those who are broken, whose lives have experienced brokenness. He has come to us in our place of brokenness. You should never think that Epworth is not making a difference in ministry, in reaching out to folks whose lives are broken and being put together through the ministry of the church. You should never think that, because over and over and over again, there are people whose lives are changed through their encounter with Jesus in the ministry of this church. We could run down a long list of folks who church was how they got their life together. Epworth was the place that allowed them to begin to make those steps. And in the last year, we've seen miracles in the lives of people, from where they were to what God has done and how it's put their life back together. Jesus comes bringing healing for our brokenness, that our lives sometimes can be shattered. Like earthen vessels, Paul says we are. We're like earthen vessels, so fragile, easily broken. I mean, people are just the most amazing things. God-given creations that are beautiful and broken, yet at the same time. In each one of us, we see how fragile we are, and yet a place of beauty. And you may not see it always in your life. Sometimes we're our own worst critics. But God sees the beauty of each one of us and how we are created and who he has created us to be. And that Epworth, in its ministry, helps nurture us along the way toward healing and wholeness. Because each of us bear a bit of brokenness in our lives. Every one of us shares and searches for meaning and purpose, direction, and God is there to offer it to us. I think one of the great powers of this story is that there are two acts of healing that occur. Jesus is with a group of folks who, if you will, are on the edge. He's hanging out with those whose lives are broken. And as he's there, a leader of the synagogue comes, begging Jesus, come. I know if you come, you can make my daughter well. I imagine that he had a hard time admitting that he didn't have his life together, that there was a place of brokenness and need in his life. As a leader of the synagogue, he is one of those who, within the community, is in high standing, one who looks as if he has it all together, and yet there's place of need it's beyond his own understanding, his daughter's death. And he comes begging Jesus, you can make her well, I know. Sometimes it's hard to admit that. In my own life, I find that to be the case. My parents brought me up to, if I didn't have it together, at least look like I had it together, and that help is always available for those who are in need, but we're not those who are in need, so we're not going to ever need to require relying on someone's help. To be self-autonomous, to be one who's able to care for the other. I remember so clearly as a child, to whom much is given, much is expected. And in my life, that's how I often lived, as one who felt like I was pretty privileged, who had received much in my life. And therefore, it was more about giving than it was about ever receiving. But there have been moments in my life when I realized that I didn't really have it all together, and that I relied upon God's grace just as much as anybody else. That his love and care was there for me in my brokenness. And that may sound like such an elemental thing. But I knew his grace was there for others. I just didn't experience it as being there for me because I didn't need it, I thought. Isn't that arrogant? That's maybe another sign of how off track I was. I just thought it was there for others whose lives were broken and that I had it together, so I didn't really need God's grace and care. The closest, and I tell you, we've been very privileged in our family to have had great health. But the closest I can imagine being where that father was whenever Angie woke me up a couple of weeks ago, about 4 a.m, with severe pain, and we start making our way to the hospital. Some of you have been there probably many times with one another in your family. It was the first for me. I tell you, I'm sure he saw it. I was choking it back because I don't like to do it. But whenever Dr. Storms came into the ER room, there was just a release, just to know that it was going to be okay. And as he prayed with me and Angie while she was there before going on up to Mercy Hospital, I knew that God's love and care was holding her up. But it's the closest in my life I've been to that place where the Father was, coming asking Jesus for help. He didn't want to ask for help. I bet you very much that he was one who wanted to have taken care of everything for his family on his own. To come to Jesus and ask for help was probably the hardest thing that he had ever done. Some of you in your personal lives are that way as well. I know because you are fabulous people, outstanding people who make a difference in the world. You're all about contributing to the betterment of the community and changing the world through God's love. I know it, I see it in your lives, and yet sometimes maybe you have trouble admitting your need, admitting that there's a place of brokenness within your own life. On the other side of that is the woman who has the issue of blood for 12 years. She's been dealing with a healthcare crisis in her life for a long time. She's desperate. She's been desperate. And not in this account, but in other accounts in the Gospels, it tells us that she spent all that she had looking for a healthcare solution in her life. And she knows the brokenness of her life. In fact, because of this issue of blood and because of the law that they had, she was not allowed to the temple. She was not allowed to be a part of communal worship. We're not talking about just a health issue. We're talking about her whole social life, her connection. She wasn't able to come to worship, to be reconnected to God. She wasn't able to find that place in the community. Can you imagine how isolating that must have been? How broken she must have felt and separated? No wonder she sneaks up behind Jesus thinking, if I could just grab the cloak and touch his cloak, maybe I'll be made well. She's been pushed to the edge all her life. Here's a man who's a leader in the synagogue. He's at the center of community. She has been pushed to the edge of community. Do you see how radical this story is? Jesus is telling us that in him, all brokenness is healed. All brokenness is made well. From those who are at the center of power to those at the furthest edges, God is about transforming lives. God is about taking the broken and making it whole. A creation that's broken, not just human life. We certainly brought brokenness to the creation of the world. So a friend of mine said it this week on Facebook. He says, why are we surprised if we fracture the earth with water and chemicals? Why are we surprised that it shakes in return? More earthquakes in the state in the last several months than have ever happened. I mean, we're the hotbed for earthquakes in the world today. Any guess why? Who knows? God takes our brokenness, the brokenness we bring to the world, and brings healing. a brokenness that heals throughout creation. We come not just for the healing of the world, but for our own. We come for our own need, our own sense of a purpose in life. Too often we might think that it's for someone else, but it's for us as well. He takes our brokenness and makes us strong. Sometimes it's at the broken places that we then become strong. God takes and heals us there, and it becomes, have you ever seen an x-ray after a bone has been broken? And you see how the calcium has filled in along the crack, and that place of brokenness now becomes a place of great strength. I learned this whenever Thomas was real young, and he was in Taekwondo classes and got his black belt. And as he was working his way through that, one of the reasons why those guys have such incredible strength and their bones really don't break is because every time they're in combat and there's hitting, there's a small fracture in the bone. And those fractures are healed and healed and healed to such a degree that they become the place of greatest strength. Stronger than ever before because of the thorough working and working and working in the bone. God does a similar thing with us. At the places of our brokenness, God brings about a place of greatest strength. You've experienced that. You know it, don't you? Whenever a person who has struggled with an addiction their whole life, they finally get it together. They get to the place where they realize, I can't handle this anymore. They rely upon God, and God pulls them through. Theirs becomes a testimony to share with someone else, to help them in the midst of their brokenness. God transforms that place of brokenness and makes it a strength that's offered for the community, a healing that changes each and every one of us. A person who struggles through great illness, cancer, and is a survivor becomes a person of strength for others who are going through the same thing. God will always take our brokenness and not only bring about healing in our lives, but use that as a tool for healing in the life of another. It's at that point that God transforms us. His healing is for us. And prayer changes our lives, and it sends us out to make a difference in the world. We are sent out to be healers in a broken world. There's a great story I love of a guard who was retiring, a security guard who'd spent 40 years working at the Louvre in Paris. On our trip to go visit Anna this past summer, we got to stop by Paris for 24 hours. I don't know there's any way you can do that except just to get the highlights. But it gave us a kind of a fun experience and to know when we go back sometime what we'll hope to see. But he said, when he was asked about his retirement, what did he remember most? And he said what he remembered most was how visitors to the Louvre would come and stand before this amazing sculpture of Apollos. And looking at Apollos would just see the beauty that this artist had rendered. And what he said is they always would straighten their shoulders a bit. And as they walked away taller than they came. I think that's what we do in worship, isn't it? We come to remember who it is that God is in our life, what it is Jesus has done for us in granting us grace, in opening the door, in creating a fellowship and community that embraces us all. When we come and we stand before that and worship, it makes us all stand a bit taller. Interestingly, when any of us is broken, we all are broken, I think. And when any of us is made well, we are all made well together. And when any of us is able to stand tall again in our lives, we are all able to stand tall again. Jesus gives us the strength, the power to stand tall, to embrace the goodness of this creation, to embrace our role of who God created us to be. And in doing so, to shed ourselves of all the brokenness and sin that would hold us back, be set free to be his agents of change in the world, transformed to be transforming. I think that's what Jesus does for us. Not all healing is easy. Some healing is difficult. Sometimes the pain of surgery has to precede the healing. Sometimes there's great struggle in the midst of it. But always, 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 God is working to heal and make new. It doesn't always end the way we would like. I remember a very close friend struggling and being with him throughout the time, and his hoping, praying that his life, his body would be made new, and it wasn't. And as we got to the end, what we found is that we feared death. We thought death was the enemy. But as we got closer to the end, what we found is that he wasn't so scary after all. In one hand, he held peace, and in the other, comfort. Moved, even death is a way of healing as we move from the brokenness of life to life eternal. Death was not the enemy or the struggle, and it does not mean that whenever we aren't healed the way we think we might like to be, that God isn't working toward healing. That even in that final embrace, death was an agent of God's healing, more than we could have ever expected or thought. God sends us out to be agents of healing, to be agents of change. There's a beautiful story that I saw several years ago. It's a story of a young boy named Michael, several years old. His parents were expecting a baby, and then the time came. The baby was born. Was born prematurely, his little sister. He'd been waiting for her to come home. And it's one of those stories that was really quite remarkable because he was so young, and his sister was so little in the ICU, in the NICU, I think they call it, for the small babies. They wouldn't allow him to go see her. And her health was getting worse and worse day by day. In fact, they were at the point where they thought there was no way she was going to make it. He had been learning a song that he wanted to sing to her. He'd been wanting to sing to her since he knew she was coming, and he'd been working on that song over and over and over again. And he insisted to his mom he needed to come sing the song to his sister. And finally, whenever she felt like it was probably the end, she brought him up to the hospital. Despite the protest of the staff, they didn't want this young child, but they put him in a big gown that draped behind him and trailed along and brought him in there every way, every step, having to push past folks who wanted to keep him out. And they brought him to his little sister, and he began singing the song. You are my sunshine. You know that song? You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. And as he sang to her, it was expression of his love for her. Amazingly, 2 days later, this girl who was not going to make it, they were ready to take home. Because his song brought a sense of healing. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Brought healing. Sometimes it's the power of connection and community that God uses, but every one of us is called to be an agent of healing and transformation and change in this world. To take a world that's broken and to make it whole again. Again, because that's what God originally intended for us to be. This morning, each of you probably wondered, what the heck is this Band-Aid doing on my bulletin? Every one of you this morning have attached to your bulletin a Band-Aid. It's a visual reminder, if you will, that we are to be those who carry healing to the world. We are made well, we are bound up, we are empowered by Christ to be his healers in the world. There's somebody this week you're going to meet. Maybe it's within your family. You may not have to travel far to find them, who's in need of God's healing. As you see that, let it be a reminder that you're to help make a difference there, to help bring healing. Maybe it's as you go your way and in the midst of your daily work, you run into somebody, that person who maybe just is always grouchy and you have a hard time dealing with. Maybe they're always grouchy because they have a brokenness within. Maybe they are in need of God's healing and God's calling you in that moment. I don't know what it is. I pray that you'll listen for the Spirit's leading to help bring healing to a broken world, because God has been there for each of us and God carries us to that place. Let it be your ministry this week to be an agent of healing. Amen.